There's a version of the empath most people will never meet, and the ones who do, they don't forget it. Not because this empath is louder, not because they're angrier, but because they've gone completely still. And that stillness, that unshakable, unreactive calm, feels dangerous to everyone who's used to controlling them through chaos. You know the old empath, the one who absorbed everyone's emotions, who explained, apologized, overfunctioned, who made themselves small to keep others comfortable, who carried burdens that weren't theirs because they couldn't stand to watch people suffer. But something happened, something shifted, and now when you look at them, you don't see the same person. You see someone who's learned to feel everything without being moved by anything that isn't theirs to carry. Carl Jung called this psychological sovereignty. Most people call it cold, detached, intimidating, but what they're really experiencing is this: an empath who finally stopped leaking power, who stopped performing empathy for people who weaponized it, who learned the difference between compassion and self-abandonment. And that shift, it doesn't look like rage, it doesn't look like breakdown, it looks like calm. The kind of calm that comes from someone who's seen through every manipulation, survived every betrayal, and decided they're done playing a rigged game. This video isn't about empowerment, it's about the psychological architecture beneath that dangerous calm. What happens in your nervous system when you stop reacting, why people feel threatened when you stop performing, and most importantly, why this stage, the one Jung spent years trying to help people reach, is the one most people will spend their entire lives avoiding. If someone in your life has recently gone quiet and you can't figure out why, this is your answer. And if you're the one who's gone quiet, this is your confirmation: you're not broken, you're becoming untouchable. Let me be precise about what this calm is, because it's not numbness, it's not dissociation, it's not emotional shutdown. It's differentiation. Jung observed that most empaths live in a state of what he called psychic fusion. They can't tell where they end and others begin. Someone walks into the room anxious and suddenly they're anxious. Someone projects anger at them and they absorb it as truth. Someone needs them to regulate their emotions and they do it automatically, without even realizing they've abandoned themselves in the process. But the healed empath, they've learned to feel without absorbing, to witness without merging, to care without carrying. Here's what that looks like in real time. Someone walks in angry, the old empath would immediately scan: did I do something wrong? How do I fix this? How do I make them feel better so I can feel safe again? The healed empath feels the anger, registers it, and stays completely still, not because they don't care, but because they've realized that anger isn't information about me, it's information about them, and I don't need to manage it. That's the calm. It's not coldness, it's clarity. Research on healed empaths confirms this. They develop fortified emotional boundaries. Instead of internalizing negative energy directed at them, they reflect it back, not as an attack, but as a refusal to carry what isn't theirs. And people feel that shift immediately, because for years they've been able to destabilize this person with a look, a tone, a guilt trip, and suddenly, nothing, no reaction, no defense, no performance, just calm, unshakable presence. And to people who have relied on that empath's reactivity to regulate their own emotional state, that calm feels like a threat. Because it is, not to them personally, but to the entire dynamic they've been unconsciously feeding off. When an empath stops reacting, the game ends, and most people don't even realize they were playing. Here's what nobody tells you about becoming a healed empath: you become a mirror, not intentionally, not performatively, but by simply existing in your own centered presence, you reflect back to people exactly what they're avoiding in themselves. And most people cannot handle being seen that clearly. Let me give you a concrete example. You're in a conversation with someone who's performing. They're telling you a story designed to make you react, to validate them, to rescue them, to engage with their drama. The old you would have leaned in, asked follow-up questions, offered solutions, emotionally invested in making them feel better. The healed you stays present but doesn't engage the performance. You listen, you acknowledge, but you don't feed it. And in that space, that refusal to collude with their narrative, they see themselves reflected back without the distortion they're used to. And it's uncomfortable, because now they have to sit with the gap between the story they're performing and the truth they're avoiding. That's why people call healed empaths cold, detached, hard to read, because what they're actually experiencing is the absence of their usual emotional supply. The empath is no longer playing the role of audience, validator, or emotional regulator, and without that role, people are forced to confront their own patterns. Jung would say the healed empath has integrated their shadow. They've stopped projecting their worth onto others' approval. And now, by simply existing in that integration, they trigger everyone else's unintegrated shadow. You didn't do anything, you're just not performing anymore, and that non-performance exposes the performance in others. Here's the part that's hardest to accept. Some people will leave, not because you hurt them, but because they can't operate in a dynamic where you're no longer giving them the reactions they need to avoid their own inner work. And here's what you need to understand: that's not your responsibility to fix. Your calm isn't cruelty. It's the natural result of finally choosing yourself with the same conviction you used to choose everyone else. So what actually happened in your nervous system to create this shift? For years, your amygdala, the part of your brain that detects threat, was in overdrive. Every emotional spike from another person registered as danger. Every conflict, every raised voice, every silent treatment triggered your fight-flight-fawn response. And because fighting felt too dangerous and fleeing felt impossible, you fawned, you over-explained, you apologized, you made yourself smaller. But something changed. Maybe it was one betrayal too many. Maybe it was finally seeing the pattern instead of just feeling it. Maybe it was the moment you realized, I've been abandoning myself to keep others comfortable, and they still leave. Whatever it was, your brain recalibrated. Your amygdala stopped interpreting every emotional reaction as a threat to your survival. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for executive function and emotional regulation, came back online. And for the first time in years, you could feel someone's anger without thinking it meant you were in danger. You could witness someone's disappointment without believing you were responsible for fixing it. You could be present with chaos without becoming chaotic yourself. That's not emotional numbness, that's nervous system regulation. Research on trauma recovery shows this. When empaths heal from hypervigilance, they don't lose their sensitivity. They gain discernment. They can still feel deeply, but they're no longer hijacked by what they feel. And here's what that looks like. Someone tries to guilt trip you. You feel the attempt, you recognize the manipulation, and you simply don't respond, not because you're punishing them, but because your nervous system finally understands, I don't have to react to every provocation to prove I'm a good person. That's the shift, and to people who have gotten used to your reactivity, your new calm feels disorienting, threatening, wrong. But to you, it feels like the first full breath you've taken in years. But I need to confront something most healed empath content refuses to address. There's a shadow side to this calm, and if you're not conscious of it, you'll weaponize your healing without realizing it. You start looking at people who still react, who still explain, who still overfunction, and you feel contempt. You think they haven't done the work, they're still asleep, they're weak. But 6 months ago, that was you. And if you can't hold compassion for people who are still in that pattern, you're not sovereign, you're superior. And superiority is just fear with a spiritual makeover. There's a difference between not reacting and deliberately withholding to hurt someone. If you're staying calm specifically to watch someone squirm, to make them feel what you felt, to punish them for not understanding you, that's not healing. That's revenge dressed up as boundaries. Real calm comes from self-possession, not contempt. If you can't tell the difference, you're not ready yet. You've learned that not reacting gives you power. So now, when someone has a legitimate concern, when they're asking for repair, when they need you to show up, you go calm instead. You use your non-reaction as a shield to avoid being vulnerable, being wrong, being human. That's not sovereignty, that's hiding. You've confused dangerous calm with emotional unavailability. You've gone so far inward that you've stopped connecting altogether. You're not protecting your energy anymore. You're using your healing as an excuse to never risk intimacy again. Jung warned about this. Individuation isn't isolation. You don't become whole by cutting everyone out. You become whole by learning to stay connected to yourself while being present with others. If you recognize yourself in even one of these, good. That means you're being honest, because the shadow isn't your enemy. It's the part of you that's still learning how to hold power without abusing it. And until you can sit with that discomfort without defending it, you're not fully integrated. You're just operating from a more sophisticated version of the same wound. So how do you maintain this calm without losing your humanity? How do you stay sovereign without becoming superior? Check your intention. Before you go calm in a situation, ask yourself, am I protecting my peace or am I punishing someone? Am I setting a boundary or am I withdrawing to make them feel abandoned? If you can't answer honestly, you're not ready to wield this power yet. Distinguish between reaction and response. Not reacting doesn't mean not communicating. You can stay calm and still say, I hear you, but I'm not taking that on. You can stay centered and still acknowledge someone's pain without making it your responsibility. Calm isn't silence, it's clarity, and clarity still speaks, it just doesn't perform. Let people have their feelings about your calm. Someone will call you cold, someone will say you've changed, someone will accuse you of not caring anymore. Let them, their discomfort with your healing is not your emergency. You're not obligated to shrink back into reactivity to prove you're still the good one. Stay in your body. The moment you go into your head to justify your calm, you've lost it. Real sovereignty lives in your nervous system, not your narrative. Feel your feet on the ground, notice your breath, return to sensation. When you stay embodied, your calm isn't a performance, it's a state, and people can feel the difference. Keep doing your own work. Healing isn't a destination. The moment you think you've arrived is the moment your shadow takes over. Stay humble, stay curious, stay willing to see where you're still operating from woundedness instead of wholeness. Because the most dangerous empath isn't the one who never reacts. It's the one who's integrated enough to know when a reaction is actually needed, and skilled enough to choose it consciously instead of being hijacked by it. Here's what most people misunderstand about the healed empath's calm. It's not that they don't care. It's that they've finally learned to care about the right things. They care about truth more than approval. They care about peace more than performance. They care about protecting their energy more than managing everyone else's reactions. And to a world that's built on empaths self-sacrificing to keep systems running, that shift is terrifying. Because if empaths stop absorbing everyone's chaos, who will? If empaths stop overfunctioning, what happens to all the people who have been underfunctioning? If empaths stop explaining, apologizing, and performing, who will do the emotional labor that holds everything together? And the answer is not your problem. Jung spent his life teaching this. You cannot become whole by making yourself acceptable to a world that benefits from your fragmentation. You become whole by withdrawing your energy from systems that require your self-betrayal to function. And when you do that, when you finally choose your own nervous system regulation over everyone else's comfort, you don't become cold, you become free. And that freedom, that dangerous, unshakable calm, that's what sovereignty actually looks like. Not loud, not reactive, not performing, just deeply, quietly, unmistakably self-possessed. The day you develop dangerous calm, everything changes. Not because you've stopped feeling, but because you've finally learned to feel without being consumed by what isn't yours. People will call it growth, some will call it change, a few will call it cruelty. Let them, you're no longer available to debate your right to exist in your own sovereignty. You've learned what Jung spent decades teaching. The most powerful thing an empath can do isn't absorb more pain, it's learn when to stop absorbing altogether. And when you do, when you finally go still, grounded, unmoved by manipulation and unbothered by misunderstanding, you don't become dangerous to good people. You become dangerous to dynamics that required your unconsciousness to survive. And that's not loss, that's liberation. That's the empath who finally learned your calm doesn't need their permission.